HO, Karen called the sheriff on the man who owned the entire valley. The day I inherited my grandfather's 2,500-acre valley, I thought I was coming home. Instead, an HOA president stepped in front of my truck, called the police, and told everyone I was trespassing on my own land. Behind her stood hundreds of homes, a locked gate, and a community convinced she was in charge. What started as one strange encounter uncovered missing records, hidden agreements, secret meetings, and a lie that had survived for more than a decade. Stay with me, because every answer only led to a bigger question, and the final twist changed the future of the entire valley. And if you enjoy stories about land, justice, quiet determination, and ordinary people standing their ground, consider subscribing. There's always another road, another gate, and another story waiting just beyond the fence line. The first time I drove back into Mercer Valley as its legal owner, a sheriff's cruiser was already waiting at the gate. I had not crossed a fence. I had not cut a lock. I had not touched a thing that did not belong to me. I was sitting in my old silver pickup with a certified deed on the passenger seat, watching dust roll across the private road my grandfather had graded by hand before I was born. The gate in front of me was new, black iron, electronic keypad, camera mounted on the left post. A blue and gold sign bolted across the center read, "Whitmore Ridge Community. Private resident access only, managed by HOA authority." Under that sign, half buried in weeds and red Wyoming dust, I saw something older. A weathered wooden marker. Gray oak. Hand-carved letters. Only 3 words were still visible. Mercer Valley Ranch. My grandfather's sign. Before I could get out of the truck, a woman in a white SUV pulled in sideways across the road. She stepped out wearing a cream blouse, dark jeans, and a red blazer too clean for a ranch gate. Her hair was silver blonde, cut sharp at the jaw, and she carried a clipboard like it was a court order. She walked straight to my window. "You need to turn this vehicle around," she said. I looked at her, then at the cruiser, then back at the gate. "Ma'am," I said, "this is Mercer Valley." Her smile did not reach her eyes. "I know exactly what it is. My name is Ethan Mercer." That got a small reaction. Not surprise. Recognition. The kind a person has when they have been warned about you before you ever arrive. She lifted her phone and started recording. "This individual is attempting unlawful entry," she said loudly. "Not to me, but to the phone. He is claiming ownership of HOA-managed property and refusing to comply with security procedures." I opened the folder on my passenger seat and pulled out the certified deed. "My grandfather, Walter Mercer, left me this valley," I said, 2,500 acres, recorded last week with the county. She glanced at the deed the way someone glances at a flyer stuck under a windshield wiper. Paper doesn't override community governance. That was the first sentence that told me I was dealing with more than a misunderstanding. The deputy stepped out of the cruiser then. Sheriff Travis Cole was not with him yet. This was a younger man, polite but cautious, one hand near his belt, eyes moving between me and the woman in the red blazer. "Sir," he said, "can I see your identification?" I handed him my license and the deed copy. The woman spoke before he could read it. "I'm Vanessa Whitmore, president of the Whitmore Ridge Homeowners Association. This gate protects 340 homes. This man has been warned not to interfere with our managed land." "I haven't been warned by anyone," I said. She turned toward me. "You inherited a name, not control." Behind her, residents had started gathering. A man in golf shorts, a woman with a dog on a leash, 2 teenagers on bikes. A security guard in a black polo stood near the keypad, watching me like I was the danger. The deputy looked down at the deed, His expression changed slightly. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "this shows a large parcel transfer." "It shows the valley," I said. Vanessa's voice sharpened. "It shows an outdated ownership interest subject to a long-term stewardship agreement. We have operated this community legally for 11 years." I looked past her at the rooftops beyond the gate. They rose where cattle pasture used to be. Clean roofs, paved streets, porch flags, sprinklers ticking in the morning heat. 340 homes. On land my family still held title to. The deputy cleared his throat. "Ms. Whitmore, do you have documentation showing HOA control?" She smiled again. "Of course. It's already been provided to the county." "Then I'd like to see it," I said. She turned back to me slowly. "You'll receive what you need through counsel." That was when I noticed the second camera. Not the one on the gate. A small dome camera mounted on a pine pole across the road, aimed at the old ranch marker. They had not only covered my grandfather's sign, they had been watching it. The deputy handed back my deed. "For today," he said carefully, "I'm going to ask everyone to step back and avoid escalation until this can be reviewed." Vanessa looked satisfied, as if restraint was victory. "You heard him," she said. "Leave." I folded the deed and placed it back in the folder. "I'll leave," I said, "but not because you own this gate." Her jaw tightened. I started the truck, backed slowly away from the entrance, and watched the residents whisper behind her. Vanessa stood in the dust with her clipboard held against her chest, the HOA sign shining above the buried ranch marker like a lie nailed over a grave. At the bend in the road, I stopped long enough to take one photograph through the windshield. The new sign, the old sign, the cruiser, Vanessa, all in one frame. Then I drove toward town with one question in my head. Why would an HOA call the police on the legal owner of the land unless they were terrified he might start reading the paperwork? I rented a room above a hardware store on Main Street that afternoon. The room wasn't much. One bed, one desk, one window overlooking a feed store parking lot. But it was quiet. And right now, quiet mattered more than comfort. I spread every document from the estate across the desk. The deed, the inheritance transfer, tax records, survey maps, aerial photographs, everything connected to Mercer Valley. For 3 hours, I found nothing unusual. Then my phone rang. "Mr. Mercer?" a woman asked. "Yes. My name is Vanessa Whitmore. I believe we should clear up today's misunderstanding." Her voice sounded calmer than it had at the gate. That alone made me suspicious. "I'm listening." "Good. Because I'd hate for this to become expensive." There was a pause. Then she continued. "Our legal team has prepared documentation explaining the HOA's authority over Mercer Valley. I'd like to deliver it personally." I looked down at my grandfather's deed. "Bring it." She arrived less than 40 minutes later. Not a lawyer, not a board member, just Vanessa carrying a thick black binder. She placed it on the desk between us. The title was embossed in gold lettering. Mercer Valley Stewardship Agreement, 99-year land management. Contract executed July 2013. I opened it immediately. The document was over 200 pages long. Maps, appendices, engineering exhibits, board resolutions, county certifications. At first glance, it looked legitimate. Too legitimate. People committing fraud often overbuild their paperwork because they believe volume creates authority. Vanessa watched me turn pages. "We've managed the valley for 11 years, she said. "The roads, utilities, infrastructure, community development." I kept reading. "We've invested millions, still reading. The residents rely on us." I stopped on page 17. There it was. The signature. Walter James Mercer, my grandfather. According to the document, he had granted the HOA operational authority over all 2,500 acres for 99 years, a contract that effectively handed them control of the entire valley. Vanessa smiled. You see the problem now? I looked at the signature again, then a third time. Something wasn't right. Most people see a signature as a picture. I see it as movement, pressure, rhythm. My grandfather signed thousands of documents during his life. I had reviewed many of them while settling the estate. His handwriting was always strong, deliberate, squared. This signature wasn't. The letters drifted, the pressure varied, the final stroke hesitated, like someone stopping halfway through a familiar motion. I said nothing. Vanessa mistook silence for defeat. It surprises everyone at first. I turned another page. County approval, board authorization, legal certification. Every section appeared designed to intimidate rather than explain. Then I noticed something else. The attorney listed on the filing, Gerald Pike, Property Counsel. The name meant nothing to me, but I wrote it down, along with every registration number appearing in the binder. When I finally closed it, Vanessa looked pleased. I assume you'll stop representing yourself as owner now? I almost laughed. Instead, I asked a simple question. Why call the police? Her expression tightened. What? If this agreement is valid, why call the police on me? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she gathered the edge of the binder. Because residents were concerned. No, I said. Residents weren't concerned. The room became very quiet. You were. For the first time, her confidence slipped. Only slightly, but enough. Then she stood. I suggest you consult counsel before taking further action. And I suggest you keep every copy of this document. That earned a reaction. Her eyes narrowed. Why? I closed the binder. Because if it's legitimate, you'll want it preserved. Vanessa stared at me for a long second. Then she left. The moment her SUV disappeared down Main Street, I reopened the agreement. I spent most of the night reviewing every page. At 11:14 p.m., I found the second problem. The county recording number listed on the final certification page followed an outdated format abandoned years before the filing date. At 12:37 a.m., I found the third. One of the attached survey references cited a parcel map that didn't exist in county archives. By 2 a.m., sticky notes covered half the binder. The document wasn't falling apart. Not yet. But cracks were appearing. Small ones. The kind that grow. At sunrise, I carried the binder downstairs and bought coffee from the diner across the street. While I sat by the window reviewing my notes, a notification appeared on my phone. Someone had tagged me in a public community post. I opened it. The Whitmore Ridge OA page had uploaded a photograph from the gate. My truck, my face, my deed in my hand. The caption read, "Warning to residents. Individual falsely claiming ownership of Mercer Valley has attempted unauthorized access to community property. Please report any contact immediately." More than 100 comments had already appeared. Trespasser. Scammer. Fraud. One comment caught my attention. It had been posted only 3 minutes earlier. The account had no profile picture, no history, no name, just one sentence. Check the registration records, then check who filed them. I stared at the message. When I refreshed the page 30 seconds later, it was gone. Deleted. But not before I took a screenshot. I leaned back in my chair. Someone inside Whitmore Ridge had just tried to warn me. And whoever they were, they knew exactly where the first crack in Vanessa Whitmore's story could be found. The next morning, I drove to the Delaney County Records Office with a notebook full of registration numbers copied from the stewardship agreement. I started with the recording number that had bothered me the night before. The clerk at the front counter typed it into her system. Nothing appeared. She tried again. Still nothing. "Maybe it's archived," she said. "Can you search by parcel?" She entered Mercer Valley. Several records appeared. Deeds, tax filings, boundary surveys, agricultural permits, but not the 99-year Valley Stewardship Agreement. Not a trace of it. The clerk frowned. That's strange. It was more than strange. If a document supposedly controlled 2,500 acres and 340 homes, it should have been impossible to miss. I thanked her and walked out with more questions than answers. By noon, the first certified letter arrived. It was waiting outside my room above the hardware store. The return address belonged to Whitmore Ridge HOA Legal Affairs. Inside was a demand that I immediately cease making ownership claims regarding Mercer Valley. According to the letter, my actions were creating confusion among residents and interfering with lawful HOA operations. At the bottom sat a deadline, 48 hours. I laughed when I read it. Then I noticed the second envelope. This one contained a violation notice. Apparently, I had violated community regulations by photographing HOA infrastructure. The listed fine was $2,500. I wasn't even inside the community when I took the photo. The third envelope arrived before dinner. Unauthorized interference with community governance. Fine, $5,000. The fourth arrived the next morning. Failure to comply with HOA directives. Fine, $7,500. The amounts weren't random. Someone was trying to create pressure, paper pressure, the kind designed to make a person surrender before a courtroom ever becomes necessary. I spread the letters across the desk and took photographs of every page. Then my phone buzzed. "Rachel Mercer, tell me you're sitting down." "I'm sitting. They've started posting about you." I opened my laptop. The Whitmore Ridge community page was exploding. There were dozens of posts now. Some called me a fraud. Others claimed I was trying to seize residents' homes. One post showed a photograph of my truck entering town. Another claimed I was under investigation. Neither statement was true. What bothered me wasn't the lies. It was how organized they felt. Every post appeared within minutes of the previous one. Every comment reinforced the same narrative. Someone was coordinating this. That evening, I tried calling 2 local contractors whose names appeared on old ranch records. Neither answered. One sent a text. "Sorry, Ethan. Can't get involved." The second blocked my number entirely. By the third day, the pattern was impossible to ignore. People weren't avoiding me. They were avoiding Vanessa Whitmore, or whatever influence she carried. I spent the afternoon reviewing tax records and old plats. By sunset, papers covered nearly every surface of the room. Mercer Valley sat in the center of a growing web. Parcel maps, ownership histories, infrastructure easements, road permits. The deeper I looked, the stranger things became. The HOA appeared everywhere, yet ownership appeared nowhere. At 8:17 p.m., another email arrived. No name, no signature, no subject line, only a single attachment. I opened it. It was a screenshot, an internal HOA discussion board. One message had been highlighted. "If Mercer ever inherits, execute response protocol immediately." Date, 3 years earlier, 3 years before my grandfather died. I read the sentence twice, then a third time. They had planned for me, not a future owner, me specifically. Someone inside Whitmore Ridge had anticipated this inheritance years before it happened. A second message sat directly underneath. Community narrative must remain unified. Ownership claims create risk. I leaned back slowly. This wasn't a dispute that started at the gate. The gate was simply where I first saw it. The real conflict had begun long before I arrived. The next morning, while I was still studying the screenshot, a knock sounded on my door. A delivery driver stood outside holding a large certified package. The sender was Vanessa Whitmore. Inside was a fresh copy of the stewardship agreement. Attached to the front was a handwritten note. "Mr. Mercer, you are wasting time and money. This matter was settled years ago. Accept reality. Vanessa Whitmore." I stared at the note for several seconds. Then I flipped through the agreement again, page by page, line by line, looking for whatever she was so desperate to protect. Halfway through the binder, I found something new. A survey reference. Parcel Exhibit 7B. The attached map number didn't match county records. Not even close. For the second time in 3 days, a critical reference pointed to something that didn't exist. I circled it in red ink. Then I circled the earlier registration number. Then the missing filing. 3 circles. 3 cracks. And suddenly the question wasn't whether the agreement was fraudulent. The question was how many people had helped keep the fraud alive. Because somewhere behind the fines, the threats, the social media attacks, and the missing records was a group of people who knew exactly what Mercer Valley was worth. And they seemed willing to do almost anything to keep it. I called Rachel Mercer that evening. She listened quietly while I explained the missing registration records, the anonymous messages, and the growing pile of contradictions inside Vanessa Whitmore's agreement. When I finished, there was a long pause. Then she asked a question. "Did you ever open Grandpa's workshop storage trunks?" I sat up. "What trunks?" "The green military trunks in the back shed." I remembered them immediately. Heavy steel boxes shoved against a wall behind decades of tools and spare fencing supplies. My grandfather never threw anything away. When something mattered, he kept it. The next morning, Rachel met me at the old ranch workshop sitting on the northern edge of the valley. It was the first Mercer property I had entered since arriving. Unlike the HOA entrance, nobody stopped us. Nobody challenged us. Nobody called the police. The workshop still legally belonged to the estate. The 2 trunks sat exactly where Rachel remembered. Dust covered both lids. One still carried a faded shipping label from the 1980s. We dragged them into the light and opened the first one. Inside were survey maps, hundreds of them. Original plats, boundary revisions, road easements, creek surveys. Every major change made to Mercer Valley over 50 years. I spent nearly an hour sorting through them. Then Rachel opened the second trunk. "You're going to want to see this." Inside sat dozens of file folders tied with twine. Correspondence, tax records, legal notices, meeting requests. Most were routine. One wasn't. The folder was labeled CV Development Proposals. Rachel handed it to me. The first document inside was dated November 2012. 4 months before the supposed stewardship agreement negotiations began. I immediately recognized my grandfather's handwriting. The letter was addressed to the Whitmore Ridge Development Committee. The content was brief, direct, unmistakable. "Mr. Mercer formally declines all requests involving cooperative land management, infrastructure authority, or community governance participation. No future discussions are necessary. No future authorization is granted." I read it twice, then a third time. The letter completely contradicted Vanessa's narrative. According to her agreement, my grandfather willingly surrendered operational control months later. According to this letter, he wanted nothing to do with them. Rachel found another document, then another. Each moved the timeline further apart. Requests denied, meetings rejected, proposals refused. A clear pattern emerged. My grandfather had consistently resisted HOA involvement. Then we found the medical records. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. The dates mattered. April 2013, neurological evaluation, early cognitive decline, memory impairment, recommended legal supervision. I felt my stomach tighten. The stewardship agreement had supposedly been signed only a few months later. The timing wasn't proof, but it raised serious questions. Questions a courtroom would care about. Questions Vanessa would hate. By noon, we had photographed every page. I called Claire Holloway from the workshop. She agreed to review everything immediately. 3 hours later, she called back. "Ethan, I've got something." Her voice sounded different, focused, controlled. The way people sound when they've found a door nobody expected. "What did you find?" I checked every registration database available. And silence. Then, the Valley Stewardship Agreement was never registered with the state. I stood up so fast my chair tipped backward. What? If the agreement truly grants long-term authority over the property, Wyoming law requires state registration. Maybe it was filed under another reference. I checked every variation. Another pause. "Ethan, it doesn't exist." The words hung in the air. Not invalid, not challenged, not disputed. It simply wasn't there. A legal instrument controlling 2,500 acres should leave fingerprints everywhere. This one left none. For the first time since arriving in Mercer Valley, I felt the balance shift. Slightly, but enough. Vanessa had spent 11 years sans projecting certainty. Yet the foundation beneath her authority had just disappeared. That evening, I returned to the room above the hardware store. A certified envelope waited outside my door. Another demand letter. Another threat. Another deadline. I barely looked at it. Instead, I spread the workshop documents across the desk beside the stewardship agreement. Then I compared them line by line. The contradictions multiplied. Refusal letters, missing registrations, medical concerns, questionable survey references. By midnight, the agreement looked less like a legal document and more like a structure held together by assumptions. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. One text message. No greeting. No signature. Just 7 words. "She knows you're looking at the trunks." I stared at the screen. A second message arrived. "Be careful who sees Rachel." Then the number disappeared. No further texts. No replies. Nothing. I looked around the room. The workshop records. The missing registration. The warning. Someone inside Whitmore Ridge was watching everything. And if they were nervous enough to send anonymous messages, then Claire's discovery had already reached the people who stood to lose the most. Because the biggest question in Mercer Valley was no longer whether Vanessa Whitmore had authority. The biggest question was how she had convinced an entire community that she did. The answer started appearing 3 days later. Claire Holloway arrived in town carrying 2 banker's boxes and a laptop full of records. We spent most of the morning comparing names, not documents. Names. People leave fingerprints on paper. They also leave them on organizations. By noon, a pattern emerged. The attorney who certified the stewardship agreement had represented Whitmore Ridge developers years earlier. The engineering consultant who approved several infrastructure maps had worked on HOA expansion projects. 2 county filings had been processed by the same recorder's office employee. The same handful of names appeared again and again. "That's not proof of wrongdoing," Claire said. "No." But it is a network. That word stayed with me. Network. Not a board. Not a neighborhood. A network. Before we could dig deeper, Rachel called. Her voice was tense. Ethan, somebody came by the ranch workshop. I stood up immediately. What happened? They didn't take anything. How do you know? Because they weren't looking for valuables. When she arrived at the workshop that morning, several file drawers had been opened. Survey maps had been moved. Boxes shifted. Nothing stolen. Someone had been searching, specifically searching, for documents. That changed everything. People don't break into old workshops because they're worried about old tractors. They do it because they're worried about records. I drove out there immediately. Sheriff Travis Cole was already parked near the entrance. Rachel had called him before calling me. He listened while we explained what had happened. Then he walked through the building himself. When he finished, he folded his notebook closed. No forced entry. You think we're imagining it? Rachel asked. No. He looked around the workshop. I think somebody knew exactly where they wanted to look. That wasn't much, but it wasn't nothing either. The sheriff wasn't dismissing us. He was paying attention. That mattered. The pressure increased that same afternoon. Another social media post appeared. Then another. Then another. This time they weren't targeting me. They were targeting Rachel. One post accused her of helping fabricate inheritance records. Another suggested she was financially benefiting from a land scam. By evening, strangers were commenting on photographs of her family. The message was obvious. Stop helping. Claire photographed everything. Every post, every timestamp, every account. People doing legitimate business don't usually spend this much energy attacking witnesses, she said. The next morning brought something worse. Rachel received a certified letter. Not from the HOA, from a private law office. The letter warned her against interfering in an active property management dispute. The language was carefully written, technically legal, clearly threatening. When she finished reading it, she slid it across the table. I looked at the signature block. The law firm name seemed familiar. Then I realized why. It was connected to one of the names from Claire's network chart. Another connection. Another thread. Another coincidence that wasn't feeling very coincidental anymore. That evening, Claire and I reviewed financial disclosures from Whitmore Ridge. Most were ordinary. Maintenance, road repairs, insurance, utilities. Then we found a category called Administrative Community Services. The spending was enormous, far larger than comparable communities, millions over several years. Yet the descriptions were vague. No breakdown, no supporting detail, no explanation. Where's the money going? I asked. Claire leaned closer to the screen. That's exactly the question. At 9:47 that night, my phone vibrated. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Almost. The message contained only a photograph. Nothing else. The image showed a page from what looked like internal HOA meeting minutes. One line had been highlighted. Community ownership narrative must remain consistent. Beneath it sat handwritten initials. V.W. Vanessa Whitmore. A second image arrived seconds later. This one showed another note. Resistance expected from Mercer heirs. Prepare unified response. The date was nearly 4 years old. I stared at the screen. Claire stared with me. Neither of us spoke. Because the implications were obvious. They hadn't reacted to my inheritance. They had planned for it. Years in advance. The next message finally included words. They're meeting Thursday. Emergency board session. They're scared. Then the sender vanished. No name. No explanation. Nothing. I set the phone down slowly. For the first time since arriving in Mercer Valley, the balance of power had shifted enough for someone inside the system to start leaking information. Fear was spreading, not through the residents, not through the county, through the people running the operation. And when people who have controlled a story for years suddenly become afraid, they usually make mistakes. The question was whether Vanessa Whitmore would make hers before we found the truth, or because we found it. Thursday arrived with more silence than I expected. No new threats, no new fines, no new posts attacking Rachel. For the first time since I entered Mercer Valley, Whitmore Ridge seemed unusually quiet. That worried me more than the noise. People who are winning tend to stay loud. People who are losing start meeting behind closed doors. Around 8:30 that evening, my phone rang from a blocked number. I almost let it go to voicemail. Instead, I answered. "Mr. Mercer?" The voice was male. Careful. Nervous. "Who's this?" A pause. Then, "My name is Daniel Harper." The name meant nothing to me. Not yet. "I'm a resident inside Whitmore Ridge." I sat forward. "What can I do for you, Daniel?" Another pause. Longer this time. Then he said something that immediately got my attention. "Vanessa's lying to everyone." 20 minutes later, we met in the parking lot of an abandoned feed warehouse outside town. Daniel arrived alone in a blue pickup, mid-50s, work boots, weathered face. Not the kind of man who enjoyed secret meetings. The first thing he did was look around twice before speaking. That told me plenty. "You worried someone's following you?" "I'm worried someone's watching." He handed me a thick envelope. I didn't open it immediately. "What is this?" Years of things I should have reported sooner. That got my attention. We sat on opposite tailgates and talked for nearly an hour. Daniel had lived in Whitmore Ridge for 9 years. At first he believed everything Vanessa told residents. Most people did. The HOA improved roads, maintained landscaping, managed utilities. Everything looked professional, until residents started asking questions. Questions about fees. Questions about budgets. Questions about authority. According to Daniel, every question received the same answer. Trust the board. Trust the process. Trust Vanessa. And people accepted that? I asked. For a while. What changed? Daniel looked toward the dark highway. The money. That answer didn't surprise me. It rarely does. He finally told me about special assessments, emergency infrastructure fees, community preservation funds, thousands of dollars collected from residents over the years. Whenever somebody requested detailed records, the request somehow disappeared. Whenever somebody challenged spending, they became a problem. Just like Rachel. Just like me. Then Daniel pointed at the envelope. Open it. Inside sat printed emails, meeting notes, budget reports, internal memorandums. The first document made my pulse quicken. Board discussion. 5 years earlier, one sentence highlighted. Mercer ownership remains unresolved. Proceed with expansion regardless. I read it twice. Then handed it to Claire, who had joined us halfway through the meeting. She read it once and immediately asked for the next document. The second was worse. An email chain involving Vanessa. The subject line read, "Narrative consistency." One message stood out. Residents must never view ownership as disputed. Operational authority must be presented as settled fact. Claire slowly lowered the paper. That's not governance. No, I said. That's messaging. Daniel nodded. There's more. The next file contained handwritten meeting minutes, original notes, not official copies. Real notes. The kind people write when they don't expect outsiders to read them. Halfway down one page sat a sentence that froze all three of us. Owner never agreed. Move forward anyway. The room seemed to get quieter. Claire immediately photographed the page, then another, then another. Every document pushed the story further from misunderstanding and closer to intent. Vanessa hadn't simply inherited a questionable system. According to these records, she knew exactly what the ownership problem was, and she chose to ignore it. By the time we finished reviewing the files, midnight was approaching. Daniel looked exhausted, relieved, but exhausted. You understand what happens if they find out I gave you this? It wasn't a question. I nodded. Then why do it? For the first time all night, he smiled. A tired smile. My wife asked me a question last month. What question? He looked down at his hands. She asked why we're paying people to hide records from us. Neither Claire nor I said anything, because there wasn't much to say. Sometimes corruption survives because people are afraid. Sometimes it survives because decent people convince themselves someone else will act. Daniel finally stood. So what happens now? Claire closed the folder. Now, she said, we start proving what they already know. As Daniel drove away, I looked at the stack of documents sitting between us. For weeks, we'd been chasing cracks, missing registrations, questionable signatures, disappearing records. Now we finally had something different. An insider. A witness. Someone who had been inside the machine and decided he was done helping it run. And for the first time since arriving in Mercer Valley, I realized Vanessa Whitmore might not be afraid of me. She might be afraid of what happens when her own people start talking. 3 days later, she called an emergency community meeting. The announcement went out to all 340 households. Mandatory attendance encouraged. Important updates regarding ownership claims. That phrase alone told me everything. For weeks, Vanessa had dismissed me as a nuisance. Now she was addressing the entire community. Claire saw it the same way. She's trying to get in front of the story. Then let's make sure the story catches up. By the time we arrived at the Whitmore Ridge Community Center, the parking lot was nearly full. Residents filled the building. Some looked curious. Others looked angry. A few stared at me openly as I walked in beside Claire. Near the back wall stood Sheriff Travis Cole. Not in uniform. Not officially involved. Just watching. Rachel sat 2 rows behind us. Daniel Harper sat near an exit. Neither acknowledged me. That had been Claire's instruction. No unnecessary connections. No signals. No attention. At exactly 7 o'clock, Vanessa stepped onto the stage. Confident. Composed. The same expression she wore at the gate. A projector screen lit up behind her. Whitmore Ridge Community Update. She began by attacking uncertainty. Rumors. Outside interference. False ownership narratives. Then she attacked me directly, without using my name. There are individuals attempting to destabilize this community. Murmurs spread through the room. Vanessa continued. Our authority over Mercer Valley remains fully legal, fully documented, and fully enforceable. Claire didn't move, didn't react, didn't interrupt. She simply took notes. Vanessa spent 20 minutes presenting charts, financial summaries, and community achievements, road improvements, property values, infrastructure upgrades, everything carefully designed to communicate one message. Look at what we've built. Therefore, we must be legitimate. Then came the moment we had been waiting for. A resident stood up near the center aisle. Not Daniel. Someone else. A retired accountant named Martin Keene. Claire had spoken with him 2 days earlier. Ms. Whitmore, he said, Has the Valley Stewardship Agreement been properly registered with the state? The room became quiet. Vanessa smiled immediately. Too quickly. The answer was prepared. Of course it has. Several residents nodded. Martin didn't sit down. Can you confirm that for the record? Vanessa adjusted the microphone. Absolutely. Then she made the mistake. The one Claire had hoped for. The agreement was executed according to all legal requirements, properly recorded, properly filed, and fully valid under state law. Claire stopped writing. I saw Rachel glance toward the stage. Daniel lowered his eyes. Vanessa wasn't finished. She kept talking. And each sentence made things worse. I personally reviewed the filing process. Another mistake. The legal authority of Whitmore Ridge has never been in question. A bigger mistake. Then the final one. There is no evidence whatsoever suggesting otherwise. The room stayed silent. Not because people believed her. Because people were processing what they had just heard. Every word had been recorded. Every claim. Every assertion. Every denial. Vanessa looked satisfied. She believed she had won. Then Martin asked one final question. Would you be willing to provide those filing records? A brief pause. Less than a second. But it was there. I don't have them with me tonight. The first crack appeared. Residents noticed. You could feel it. Questions started moving through the crowd. Whispers, looks, doubt. The emotion in the room shifted. Not dramatically. Just enough. Vanessa sensed it immediately. She tried to regain control. We're not here to discuss paperwork. That was exactly the wrong thing to say, because the entire dispute was paperwork. The meeting ended 15 minutes later. Not because residents were satisfied, because Vanessa wanted out. Fast. As people stood and gathered their belongings, conversations erupted throughout the room. For the first time, they weren't talking about me. They were talking about her. Outside, Claire finally allowed herself a small smile. She did exactly what we needed, repeated every claim, and attached herself personally to all of them. Sheriff Travis Cole stepped outside a moment later. He didn't stop, didn't join us, didn't say much. Just one sentence as he passed. Interesting meeting. Then he kept walking. Claire watched him leave. That man knows more than he's saying. I looked back at the community center. Through the glass doors, I could still see Vanessa. Residents surrounded her now, asking questions, demanding answers. For the first time since this began, she didn't look powerful. She looked cornered. My phone vibrated. A text message from an unknown number. Only 6 words. She wasn't supposed to say that. Then another. The bank called this morning. I stared at the screen. Claire read the messages. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Because the significance was obvious. The community meeting wasn't the trap. The trap had already closed. Vanessa just hadn't realized it yet. And somewhere behind the scenes, forces much larger than an HOA board had started asking the same question we had been asking from the beginning. If Whitmore Ridge didn't legally control Mercer Valley, then who exactly had been pretending that it did? The answer started arriving faster than anyone expected. 2 days after the community meeting, Claire received a formal inquiry from a regional mortgage lender. Whitmore Ridge homeowners carried hundreds of millions of dollars in combined property value. If the HOA's authority over roads, common areas, utilities, and land access wasn't legitimate, lenders suddenly had a serious problem. The bank wanted answers. So did an insurance carrier that had underwritten community policies for years. So did several residents who had attended Vanessa's meeting. The pressure was no longer coming from me. It was coming from institutions that cared about risk. And risk had just walked into the room. The hearing was scheduled for the following Monday. By then, the story had spread far beyond Mercer Valley. Reporters filled the gallery. Residents filled the remaining seats. Rachel sat beside Daniel. Sheriff Travis Cole stood quietly near the back wall. Vanessa arrived with 2 attorneys. For the first time since I met her, she wasn't smiling. Claire organized our evidence into 3 sections: ownership, registration, conduct. Simple, clean, impossible to confuse. The judge entered precisely at 9 o'clock. Judge Rebecca Langford wasted no time. Proceed. Claire stood. The first exhibit was the certified deed. Mercer Valley remained legally titled to the Mercer family. No transfer, no sale, no conveyance, no dispute. The second exhibit was the Valley Stewardship Agreement, the document Vanessa had relied on from the beginning. The document that supposedly justified 11 years of HOA control. Claire placed it beside certified records from the state registry. No filing, no registration, no record, nothing. One of Vanessa's attorneys argued that administrative errors sometimes occur. Judge Langford asked a simple question. Do you have evidence the agreement was ever registered? The attorney shuffled papers. No answer. Claire moved forward. Next came the letters found in the storage trunks. My grandfather's written rejection of HOA management proposals. His refusal to surrender authority. His refusal to participate. Then came the medical records. Not proof of fraud, but proof that serious questions existed regarding capacity when the agreement was supposedly signed. Vanessa stared straight ahead. Her attorneys stopped taking notes. The room felt different now. Not hostile, not dramatic, certain. Then Claire introduced Daniel Harper. The courtroom became very quiet. Daniel testified calmly. He explained the internal emails, the board discussions, the warnings, the repeated efforts to present ownership as settled fact despite internal concerns. One document after another entered evidence. Owner never agreed. Proceed with expansion regardless. Community ownership narrative must remain consistent. The phrases landed heavily because they sounded exactly like what they were. Not governance. Strategy. When Daniel stepped down, several residents looked physically ill. Many had trusted those people for years. Then Claire played the recording from the community meeting. Vanessa's own voice filled the courtroom. The agreement was executed according to all legal requirements, properly recorded, properly filed, fully valid under state law. The recording ended. Silence followed. Claire introduced the certified state response showing no registration existed. Then she sat down. The courtroom became still. Judge Langford reviewed the documents for several minutes. No one spoke. No one moved. Finally, she looked toward the defense table. Do you possess evidence demonstrating lawful registration of the agreement? One attorney looked at the other. The second attorney opened a folder, closed it. Neither answered. The silence lasted only a few seconds, but it felt much longer, because everyone in the room understood what it meant. For weeks, Vanessa Whitmore had claimed certainty. Now certainty was gone. Judge Langford asked again, "Do you have responsive evidence?" Nothing. No explanation. No filing. No record. No answer. The silence became the answer. Several reporters immediately started writing. Residents exchanged looks. Sheriff Cole never changed expression. Claire simply sat beside me and waited, because she already knew what was coming. The judge scheduled final rulings for later that week and adjourned the hearing. As people began leaving the courtroom, Vanessa remained seated. For the first time since I had seen her at the gate, she looked small. Not defeated. Not yet. But no longer untouchable. Outside the courthouse, reporters rushed toward attorneys and residents. Questions flew in every direction. I ignored them. Claire didn't. She answered only one. "What's the most important thing the court heard today?" Claire looked back toward the courthouse doors. Then she said, "That authority is not created by repeating a claim. Authority comes from lawful proof." That afternoon, my phone received a single text message from the same unknown number that had been helping us for weeks. Only 5 words appeared on the screen. "It's finally falling apart." For the first time since arriving in Mercer Valley, I believed that was true. Because the courtroom had revealed something bigger than a missing registration. It had revealed that the entire structure depended on people believing a story. And once that story stopped working, everything built on top of it began to crack. The only question left was how much of Whitmore Ridge would collapse when the ruling finally arrived. We got the answer 4 days later. Judge Rebecca Langford's ruling was 43 pages long. Claire called me before sunrise. Her voice was calm, too calm, the way it always became when she knew she had won. "It's over," she said. I sat up immediately. What happened? The court voided the Valley Stewardship Agreement in its entirety. For a moment, neither of us spoke, not because we were surprised, because hearing it out loud made it real. 11 years of claimed authority had just disappeared. The ruling went further. The court found no evidence that Whitmore Ridge possessed lawful authority to manage, control, regulate, or represent ownership interests over Mercer Valley. The agreement had never been properly registered. Critical disclosures had been omitted. Material representations had been inaccurate. Every pillar holding up Vanessa Whitmore's position had collapsed. By mid-morning, the news had spread through the valley. Residents were calling attorneys. Banks were calling board members. Insurance representatives were requesting emergency reviews. And the county had begun freezing certain HOA accounts pending further investigation. The machine was no longer running. It was being dismantled. Then came the surprise. Around noon, Sheriff Travis Cole called. "Ethan." "Sheriff, you'll want to be here." "Where?" "The HOA administrative office." I arrived 20 minutes later. Several sheriff's vehicles were already parked outside. Residents stood nearby watching. Some looked angry. Others looked confused. Most simply looked exhausted. Years of certainty had disappeared in a single week. Sheriff Cole met me near the entrance. Without a word, he handed me a copy of a court order. I scanned the first page. Temporary enforcement authorization. Asset preservation. Property recovery actions. Then I saw the section that mattered. Occupancy notices. My eyes narrowed. "These are eviction notices." The sheriff nodded. "Yes." News crews were arriving. Residents were gathering. Word was spreading fast. A woman near the entrance began crying. A man demanded answers. Several people immediately assumed the same thing, that hundreds of families were about to lose their homes. I understood why. The title alone sounded terrifying. Eviction notice. But that wasn't what the order actually said. Not even close. Sheriff Cole walked directly to the HOA headquarters, the administrative office, the management building, the place where Vanessa and her board had operated for years. A deputy posted the first notice on the front door, then another, then another. Board offices, records facilities, management-controlled structures. Not a single family home, not one. The realization spread slowly through the crowd. People started reading, then rereading, then pointing. The notices weren't targeting residents. They were targeting the operation itself, the entities responsible for the fraud, the management company, the administrative board, the structures used to maintain unauthorized control. The reaction was immediate: relief, confusion, then anger. Not at me, at the people who had spent years telling them a different story. One resident held up a copy of the order. She told us we'd be protected. Another shouted back, "Protected from who?" No one had a good answer. Around 3 o'clock, Vanessa Whitmore finally arrived. The confidence was gone. No red blazer, no prepared statements, no cameras following her. Just Vanessa. She stepped out of a black SUV and froze when she saw the notices. The crowd noticed her immediately. Conversations stopped. People turned. For the first time since I had met her, she wasn't the person controlling the room. She was the person being watched. She marched toward the entrance. Sheriff Cole intercepted her before she reached the door. I couldn't hear everything they said. Only fragments. Court order, restricted access, records preservation. Then she looked directly at me. For a second, it felt like the moment at the gate all over again. Except everything had changed. Back then, she had police, authority, residents, a system. Now she had none of those things, just consequences. She stared for several seconds, then turned away without saying a word. By evening, investigators were carrying boxes out of the building: financial records, contracts, board files, computers, years of decisions packed into evidence containers. Daniel Harper arrived shortly before sunset. He stood beside me watching deputies seal the final office. Never thought I'd see this. Neither did I. He shook his head. The residents keep asking what's next. I looked toward the valley, toward the homes, the roads, the families, the lake. Everything people had spent years building their lives around. That was the real question now. Not who had lost, not who had won. What happened next? Because the court had removed the people responsible, but it had not answered what would become of the 340 families who had trusted them. As the final seal was placed on the HOA headquarters, my phone buzzed. A message from Claire. One sentence. Now comes the harder part. She was right. The legal battle was over. The future of Mercer Valley was not. And for the first time since inheriting the valley, I understood that winning ownership was only half the responsibility. The other half was deciding what to do with it. The morning after the HOA headquarters was sealed, my inbox contained more than 100 emails. Some were from attorneys. Some were from reporters. Most were from residents. The messages all asked different questions, but they shared the same fear. What happens to us now? That fear was understandable. For 11 years, Whitmore Ridge had taught people that ownership and authority were the same thing. The court had just proven they were not. But proving something in court doesn't automatically make people feel safe. 340 families still lived inside Mercer Valley. Children still rode bicycles on those roads. People still made mortgage payments. Gardens still grew behind fences. Lives were still happening. The legal battle had ended. Real life had not. 3 days later, Claire and I organized a public meeting at the same community center where Vanessa had delivered her final disastrous speech. The room filled even faster this time. Residents stood along the walls. Others crowded the rear exits. Many looked nervous. Some looked angry. A few simply looked tired. I understood all of it. When my turn came to speak, I walked to the podium carrying a single folder. No presentation, no dramatic display, just paperwork. The same thing that had started this entire fight. I looked across the room. Then I told them the truth. I didn't come here to remove anyone from their home. The room immediately became quieter. People exchanged looks. Several leaned forward. One woman in the front row began crying before I finished the sentence. For weeks, rumors had convinced residents they were about to lose everything. Now they were hearing something entirely different. I opened the folder. Inside was a proposal Claire and I had spent days drafting. The Mercer Valley Land Partnership. A new agreement, transparent, recorded, public, every page available for review, every provision filed properly, no hidden authority, no secret contracts, no management board operating behind closed doors. The proposal offered long-term residential leases to every existing household, predictable rates, annual caps, independent audits, public financial records, resident oversight, most importantly, stability. The room listened in complete silence. Then questions started. Do we get to stay? Yes. What happens to our property investments? Protected. Will there be another HOA? No. Will residents have representation? Yes. Every answer lowered the tension a little more. By the end of the evening, something remarkable had happened. People who arrived expecting conflict were discussing solutions. People who arrived expecting eviction were talking about the future. Daniel Harper spoke next. His appearance surprised many residents. Some had no idea he had helped expose the truth. Others already suspected. Daniel didn't talk about Vanessa. He didn't talk about court. He talked about accountability, about transparency, about never allowing a small group of people to control information again. When voting began several weeks later, residents elected him as the first chair of the new community council. The choice felt appropriate. He had been one of the first people willing to tell the truth when it mattered. Meanwhile, the investigations continued. Financial records taken from the HOA offices revealed years of concealed transactions, improper expenditures, undisclosed transfers. Multiple criminal referrals followed. Vanessa Whitmore's influence disappeared almost overnight. The woman who once stood at the gate telling me I had no right to enter Mercer Valley now spent her days answering questions from investigators instead of residents. The system she built had not collapsed because somebody overpowered it. It collapsed because people finally examined it. That difference mattered. Several months later, I drove back to the eastern entrance of Mercer Valley, the same road where my grandfather had once worked cattle, the same road where everything began. The HOA monument sign was gone, removed during the transition. In its place sat the weathered wooden marker I had noticed on my first day. The original ranch sign, Mercer Valley. The lettering was faded, the wood was worn, but it was real. I carried it back to its original position and secured it beside the road. No larger replacement, no new branding, no monument. It didn't need one. The valley already knew what it was. As I stepped back, my phone vibrated. A message from Claire. Court confirms final approval. Ownership recorded. Partnership active. Case closed. I read it once and slipped the phone back into my pocket. For a long moment, I simply stood there, not thinking about court, not thinking about Vanessa, not thinking about lawsuits or evidence, just looking across the land my grandfather had trusted me to protect. In the end, the lesson wasn't about winning. It was about understanding. Vanessa Whitmore believed that if enough people repeated a story, the story became reality. The law disagreed. The records disagreed. The truth disagreed. 3 simple questions had started everything. Was the agreement registered? Was the owner willing? Was the authority real? Once those questions were answered honestly, the entire structure unraveled. Mercer Valley remained home to the families who had built their lives there. The people responsible for the deception faced the consequences, and the land itself finally returned to something it hadn't experienced in years. Clarity. Because ownership is not power. Ownership is responsibility. And real authority doesn't come from signs, titles, speeches, or intimidation. It comes from truth that can survive being examined. That was the lesson hidden beneath every threat, every letter, every courtroom argument, and every acre of Mercer Valley. And if there's one thing this experience taught me, it's that most people don't lose their rights because they're weak. They lose them because nobody ever taught them to read the paperwork.
What changed everything in Mercer Valley wasn't a dramatic confrontation or some last-minute miracle. It's what a deed, a registration record, or letter in the strongest churn, and a few people willing to ask honest questions. The truth has been sitting there the whole time. The heartbreak was having the patience to look for it, and the courage to keep going when it would have been easier to walk away. I think that's a lesson that reaches beyond land, property, or even HOAs. Sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is stay calm, learn the facts, and refuse to be pushed into a decision by fear or pressures. Real strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just steady. Sometimes it's showing up one more day, reading one more page, and trusting that the truth matters. I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever dealt with an HOA, a property dispute, or a situation where paperwork told a very different story than what people were saying? If you have, wrote a yes in these comments, and if you ever had to stand your ground respectfully when you knew you were right, tell us where you're watching from and share your story. And if you enjoyed this story about ordinary people, property pride, perseverance, and quiet courage, consider subscribing. We would love to have you along for the next stories.